Welcome to an episode of Sketchy Ideas, the live point counterpoint video podcast, where we illustrate and debate concepts surrounding leadership, business, personal achievement, and party planning in a way that may make you think twice before you implement that new idea you just learned all about on the internet. Welcome. I am Michael Rampolla.
And I am Brad James.
And today we're your co-hosts for episode 76 of Sketchy Ideas. And today we're going to build on what we did last week around bringing our guest list together for 2022. We're going to talk about how we recruit guests and how we get guests interested in coming and being on this show. And by the way, it's not just by sending out headshots of Brad and Michael. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But
that's the last thing you want to do.
It's the last thing you want to do. There's a reason we use the Bitmojis. It's not just because it's cute. It's because it's cuter than us. Before we get into the content,
not by much.
Before we do that, though, let's make sure our sponsors get their appropriate shout out. Brad, tell us all about the amazing people at Cream City.
Great. So it's a new year, new marketing, new challenges, new everything. If you're trying to figure out what is the best direction to go, I would recommend you work with somebody who can help you put your marketing strategy together and help you execute. And what I mean by that is if you're trying to figure out the right direction to go, the best way to get there and to achieve specific goals, it's helpful to have somebody in your corner, especially when they are Cream City marketing and they have a team to back you. Remember, it's not always about just putting it on paper. It's about actually executing. That's one thing I can tell you about with Cream City marketing. If you're struggling to get all of those small tactical pieces done and make sure they're in alignment, do me a favor. Hit up my friend Aaron over at Cream City Marketing. Aaron at creamcitymarketing.com is the best way to get a hold of her. And that way you will be able to have a discussion about how to actually make your marketing vision happen. Aaron at creamcitymarketing.com. Back to you.
Absolutely. Sketchy Ideas is also powered by Spirity. This is a special word on alignment this week. We know that New Year's resolutions are good in theory, and we know that annual plans are nice to look at, and to-do lists are great for scratch paper. But if that's what you have and you don't have the critical pieces in between, that would be the SMART goals for your quarter, the weekly milestones for measurement, and the daily prioritized task lists for achievement, then you're missing out. Those things need to be aligned. Your long-term planning, your short-range planning, and your immediate priorities, those things need to be lined up. And if you don't have quarterly SMART goals, you don't have weekly milestones and daily prioritized lists, then there's a pretty good chance that you're out of alignment. If it's time for an alignment check, talk to us here at Spirity. We want to make sure that you are working on the most important things and your busy days become productive ones and you achieve those most important priorities. Connect with us at spirity.com for your alignment check. There you go. All right, welcome, folks. We are excited today because we're going to be building on what we started last week. Brad is master of many things. One of those things.
Let's not say master. Let's just say highly proficient.
Brad is highly proficient at many things. One of those, of course, is drawing. Another of those things is recruiting.
Definitely drawing.
Highly proficient at drawing, also highly proficient at recruiting. That's why we're really excited to have Brad give us the insights behind. I don't know what this is.
If we're comparing the two, let's put drawing at highly proficient, and then we can put that at mastery. Sure, we could do the comparison there because there's definitely a difference. Do not. Don't confuse the audience, dude. Don't confuse the audience. They all know how great my drawing is and how artistic I am.
Great indeed.
It cannot be matched. And just because it cannot be matched doesn't mean it is good or bad. But in my eyes, it is highly proficient. Okay? So let's make sure.
It cannot be matched. I'm trying to work my way through that definition. Just because it cannot be matched does not mean. All right.
It means nobody draws as bad as I do.
Okay,
nobody can draw as bad as I do.
It is unmatchable. Yes, it is like saying invaluable as a compliment, right? It's really hard
There you
to
go.
quantify the value. Right. All right.
Very
So Brad,
valuable. Very
very
valuable.
valuable. So when it comes to recruiting guests, Brad, you've done your fair share of that.
Yes.
Wins and
Yes.
losses on the way, I know. And from those
Yes.
wins and losses, you've found some things that work better than others. And I think you're going to give us the better than others options or ideas today. Is that right?
Sure. I think it's worthwhile to go through what people think need to be done, like how to approach it. And then because I think that levels the playing field, because that's a lot of the information you're going to get out there in the world. And it's not wrong. It's just not, you know how they say there's good, better, best, right?
Yep.
That is not the best way to achieve what you're trying to get to. It's a good way to do it, and it does work, which is why I don't want to discount it, but it is not the best way. And I'm not even going to talk about, I mean, there's obviously a range of good, better, best, but we'll go through the basics. We'll go through how people do it. And I do not want to discount it because for some people it works. And the reason why it works is what we will talk about in the best aspect of things. Okay.
I like that.
Because I think it's important to understand where you're at as you begin to go through this process. Now, we've been talking a lot about this, about doing this for our podcast specifically, but these are all things that I want to remind people you can do this. You're putting on an event, you need an MC. You're running a webinar, you need guests. You're trying to put together a race or some charitable thing where it would help to have some sort of celebrity, whether local or big time there. Same thing, right? Like, I want to be very clear that what we are talking about is how we are approaching this year in terms of recruiting our guest lineup for 2022. But I want to make it very clear that these things apply as principles across any type of thing where you're trying to get guests involved, including if you're in sales and you're trying to get your foot in the door with maybe that one of those dream clients. Okay. So these things do work.
Principles for influencing people, because really, ultimately, that's what we're doing, right? We're trying to influence a behavior in another human. And so understanding, so recruiting a guest, I'm influencing them to say yes and come on the show. You're influencing an MC, like you said, celebrity. I'm influencing a sale, somebody to allow me to pitch or have a discovery conversation. Whatever it is, I can't force or coerce. I'm influencing the behavior. So that's the principled level we're operating at?
Yes, and that's why I want to start with good, because I think there's a lot of people who are starting at the good level, and they're going to go into, this is how they start. And the reason why I think everybody needs to start here is because you have to figure out the right flavor for you and what makes sense and connects with you. So I want to preface this with a story. When I started down my entrepreneurial journey, these are the types of things that I put into play early on to acquire sponsors for one of the first events I ever put on, which was a kids triathlon. Okay. Which is why I'm saying it's not that they don't work, but I can tell you why it worked at the time. So when we think about getting guests, getting people involved, recruiting volunteers, celebrities, getting our foot in the door, Michael, what's the first thing that you would think about? What are you going to do? Like baseline, what's the first thing you're going to do?
I'm going to start thinking about who I'd love to have. Oh, it'd be so cool if we could get.
And we talked about the why last week, right? Like who it is and what would go into those things, all right? But what would be the first thing, if we're talking about beginning to plan the actual outreach of it, what is the first thing you're going to say, all right, this is what I need to do?
I'm going to say, who knows? Like who knows, or who knows somebody who knows? Like, I get contact information. You try to get in touch with that person somehow.
Right. That's the better method. But what is the first method that you would try?
Let's say you don't know anybody. For the record, I started on the better method without even realizing. I just want. Okay. So if I'm not at that method, then I'm just going to cold call or cold email them. There you go. Right. There we go. I'm going to send out messages. Right.
So if my first level is just, hey, I'm going to put together a message, whatever that message is. Okay. So if level 1 is a message. All right. And typically, if you're writing this message, what are the details you're going to put in this message?
Hi, I am. This is what I'm doing. This is when we're doing it. Here's why we're maybe if I may, maybe why we're doing it. But basically, I'm going to do like almost like a basic invitation to a party. Here's what. Here's when. Here's where. Can you come?
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yep. And yes, who I am, the what it is, the why it is, and the when it is, right? So the reason I wanted to start with that is because either way, you need those things.
True.
You need those things clearly defined, regardless of who you're talking to.
Can you come to our party?
Which is why
I don't know yet.
Correct. You need the who, what, when, where, why, and how, all that stuff figured out. That's why, like, when you talk about messaging with this stuff, this is the simplest way to do it, and it still works. And here's why it works. Because often people make decisions based on timing. Maybe something you state in there will click with that individual. Maybe something in that message will mean something to them, or maybe it will be convinced by somebody else. Somebody else will do the influencing for you, okay? So my story is this. Back when I was putting on the first kids triathlon, this is essentially the approach that I ran, right? The who, what, when, where, why, and how of this as I was trying to recruit sponsors. And those sponsors, one of the asks was, hey, we need you at the event because we're going to take a big picture, right? But basically, it was just an ask saying, we're doing this cool thing. It's about the kids, right? We got the messaging about what it is, all this stuff. And then I signed it with my name. We mailed out the letters. We got a bunch of sponsorships covered. But really the reason those sponsorships were covered, really why, is because there was already community equity involved. So they already knew who I was, right? So when they got the letter, this goes into your better, right? So we had the details, but they knew who I was. And the reason they knew who I was is because it was a local event and I grew up in that town and everybody knew me, right? Like all those things.
Yeah,
so
that helps.
That's why I don't want to discount this, because if you already understand your community level and the group you're asking and they know of you, you already have a chance, which is why I don't want to discount the good level of this. Now, the better level of this goes into what you were saying, right, Michael? Is that not only did I have this, but I leveraged the network to open up doors. Okay. So the better level is now I'm adding a layer of influence underneath this, right? Which is exactly what I was talking about with me as well. So by this layer of influence being added, now you've just raised the credibility, and you don't necessarily have to have all the details laid out in the message, the basic details of the message, because there's that layer of influence that's going to help you talk through and convince or influence the people who are going to make the decision. All right. So, I like it. But I still needed the good. I still needed it.
Right. I can't not include that and just go on that. It doesn't work.
Right. Okay. So we've done this. We've got this layer of influence here, and this layer of influence can be a lot of different things. So last week when we talked about who we want, why we want them, all those things pertain, but we didn't talk about this. We did talk about the layer of influence and how it pertains to us. So mostly, guess what? Layer 1 and layer 2, they're all about us and what we're doing.
Yeah.
Right? It's me asking you because I have something I need from you.
Right.
So what that means is that when we're running things that way, this is good and better, but this is not the best way to do it, right?
I'm already seeing the gap. This is great. I like it.
Yeah. So the reason and these are still important, even in the best aspect of things, right?
You still need these things to build.
Right. So at the end of the day, right, think of this. I'm a 19-year-old kid. I'm putting on this event. I'm trying to recruit sponsors. And I now, after the message has been sent out, they agreed to have a conversation to figure out what that would be. I put together the different levels, right? The asks for what the sponsorship levels are. And I'm sitting down with them. And in those conversations is where I began to learn, right? Or at least began to implement. I think I knew in theory, but didn't know how to conceptualize, how to reframe this in terms of what would benefit them, which is where we get to this level 3 aspect, right?
Yeah, I like that. So what heading do you put on that? So what do you call
benefits to the guest? Benefits to the guest.
Nice.
Okay. All right. So when we're looking at this purely from the framework of what benefits to the guest, remember, we have in a podcast, we have various stakeholders. We have Michael and me and Elizabeth and everybody involved in the show. We've got our sponsors. We've got our guests who are coming on. We have our viewers, right? Now, everything, the messaging and the layer of influence all pertains to everybody who's already part of the show. The sponsors of the show, the people working at the show, and the viewers of the show. How do we leverage those things to understand the benefits to a guest? This is where you begin to shift all of these things. Now, you'll see, like, we didn't dive into in this episode how to write out a letter or how to distribute this stuff. We're going to talk a little bit more about that next week because it varies, right? But I wanted to nail this principle because often when we think about doing these things, rather than thinking about it in the order that we're doing this, right? The messaging, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, the layer of influence that we might have. Think about it backwards when you begin to write these messaging. If you already know these things, don't write these things first. Don't. Ignore these things. We're going to work backwards. So when you're asking somebody, talk about in the first contact, no matter what, or in your messaging, as you're designing your messaging, talk about the benefits to the person you're trying to get a hold of. That's it.
That makes sense now. I think work backwards. I'm like, I thought we were already at the end where I had an event and I needed them to come. You're saying in the messaging, talk backwards. You want to say lead with the benefits.
Yes.
Leverage the network in my conversation, and then eventually, I can
get to the who, what, when, where, why.
The details, because at that point, the details will matter less. Actually, if I've done a great job, getting there, right?
Yeah. So back to the story of me raising money for sponsorships. This is where I learned. I sat down. I had a great mentor at the time. His name is Todd Kalinsky, and this is where I began to figure it out. Todd Kalinsky was a mentor to my brother, has been a mentor to me, was kind of the one who pushed to get this whole thing going, the kids triathlon. And since then, they've been a sponsor ever since with a big name brand company that I won't say on the show. But those of you who may know him, you understand why discussions with him early on in my young career were very impactful, right? This is where he began to lay out for me in an understanding that I was very naive and very new to this whole thing, and he wanted it to be successful. So rather than just saying no, he would ask questions and pull things out, and you great energy, right? But the things that he would say is like, hey, great. So I get why we're doing this, Brad. I know what you're trying to do. Why me? Why do you want us to be a part of this, right?
And then I know the answer. I need you to tell me to practice.
Yeah. And then why would anybody like me want to be a part of this, right? So he led me through a series. He led me through a series of it's a form of Socratic questioning, but to try and get me to an answer so that then I would ask it and frame it in a way that would make sense. And realistically, it didn't go exactly down this way, but this is what hit with me in the mentoring that he was doing, okay? He was saying, great, so tell me what we will get out of this, right? And so we'd go, because all of these things, especially in the first couple of years of doing this, he was going to take care of, right? I'd be like, well, we're doing race packets. We can put your stuff in your bag. Be like, hey, that sounds like a great idea, right? Keeping in mind, he knew these things. He'd be like, great, so we're doing this. Are you going to have door prizes? I was like, we thought about it, but that's also a budget thing. He's like, you know what? Why don't you, what would you think would be helpful? And be like, well, it'd be fun if there were t-shirts and other things and goggles. And he'd be like, hey, happens that we have those things here.
Love it.
Maybe what we could do is this. And basically the dialogue, what this whole experience taught me is that, if I framed it in that realm right off the bat, that conversation would have been shortened, right?
Right.
Regardless, yes or no. But
Yep.
but the reason I'm saying that is because for your guests, the most scarce resource anybody has is time.
Right.
Okay. So when you're dealing with sponsors, when you're trying to get guests involved in your event, in your podcast, in whatever, the scarcest resource is time. That's why you see things like Gary Vee throwing out, why don't you do like a 5-minute interview or 1-minute interviews with people, or people who would like to be involved. They're not going to give you their time, which inevitably for you is worth more, but they're more than happy to give money, right? It's either time or money.
Yep.
But the thing they can't scale is time. Time is limited. There's 24 hours in a day. When I am a person that people want to be in front of and talk to, time is my most valuable resource.
Absolutely.
So you have to frame these things when you're trying to get guests in terms of what the benefits are to them. Okay.
Can I grab an idea from there that's resonating right now?
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm seeing a parallel here. So give me a second to get there. The things that are the most obvious, it's reminding me of a start with why, right? So I'm saying the part that's the most obvious is the part we start with because it's the easiest thing to talk about. Whereas, the network is a little bit of the how and the why is thing all the way, but it's not my why. I mean, it needs my why, but it needs to link my why to their why.
Yes. Thank you,
So
Simon.
You're welcome. So linking to their why is takes time to figure out. But if I'm just going to blast out cold call emails, right, and hope and pray that something sticks, the time I would be better spent identifying their why, my why, and starting the conversation there.
Yes. Yes. And all right, this leads me to the next point, because when I talk to people about this, they go, great, how do I figure that out? And I start with, okay, going back to what we talked about last week. Why do you want them on the show?
Right.
Or why do you want them to be at your event? Right? Like, clearly there's something selfishly that attracted you to that person, and you've ingested some of their content, or you follow them, or you read their books or whatever, right? Like, oh, holy cow, book, great. They just wrote a new book. Holy cow, hey, I could give you some FaceTime on this platform that I created to sell your new book to this audience you may not be in front of. And I'm going to validate it because the viewers who've been following us trust me, and they're right. So it's this transference of trust, and the why becomes for them either sales, whatever. For many of the higher end people, it is about goodwill and message. So for often it is a matter of how can I spread this message? So the challenge is, though, is how do you, because we often talk about ourselves in a silo, frame that in a way. And this is where the messaging comes into play. And not only the messaging, but the distribution of the messaging, which we'll talk about next week. How to get it in front of them in a way that makes sense to them and resonates with them, and drive the response.
So tinier parallel, but another parallel. This reminds me of an idea which I call write your email backwards. Most people, when they write their email, especially if it's a request, I'm asking you to do something, right? Same as the start with why. They start with the most obvious part, the what. Here's the details. Maybe here's a suggestion on how to get the thing done. Well, by the way, here's why it's important, or here's the part why it matters. Thinking of a literally physical email, the most important part of the email is at the bottom, below the scroll, if you will. Right?
And that should not be at the bottom.
If I'm your typical email reader, you've lost me by the time the most important part is there. I've moved on to the next email. I haven't scrolled down, what have you. So typically what I say to people when they're doing this is I say, write your email. Now take the 3 paragraphs and flip them around and put your third paragraph first and your first paragraph third. Because if you get me on the why, I'll read through the how and get to your what. But if your what is not inspiring and I have to make a decision about how to use my time, not only have I not decided to use my time to do your work, I haven't even decided to use my time to read your email.
It's also exactly why one of the greatest skills that everybody in marketing, if they're a great marketer, they always say the greatest skill is copywriting. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So this is why Subject lines and emails aren't so important. This is why grabbing attention through storytelling in some way, shape, or form is important. Now, all of these things, these are all skills, guys. Every single one of these things is a skill. Now, here's the thing. We have been taught to do this backwards growing up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay? Like, this is why for some of you watching this, you're going, no, you're totally wrong. And I get it. For some of you are like, hey, 5 paragraph, what is it? 5 paragraph essay, right?
5 paragraph
Opening,
essay.
the 3 arguments, the closing statements. No, closing statement first. This is why I am right and you are wrong. Here's a story.
Bring it.
Here's my 3 pieces, the rationalization. Hey, closing statement that I would have used as an opening statement, right? Now, the cool thing is that when they taught you how to write those persuasive essays, they actually taught you the right thinking process. It's just the structure of that paper is all screwed up.
Same thing.
They taught you to start with your closing statements.
Yes.
Right?
When I used to work in corporate, this was, I remember distinctly a meeting that I wasn't in it, I was facilitating it so I could observe differently. And it was, high level people that had been working on a real project, right? And they were pitching the recommendations from their project to the board. It was a real board, like it was almost like you would see like students like pitch, like to a bunch of teachers pretending, but this was the real deal. It was real business, real problems, real board decisions. They worked on their deck, they worked on their pitch, everybody printed out. This is back in the day when you would print out the whole PowerPoint and everybody got a copy around the boardroom table, right?
Yeah.
And you probably know this, Brad. You've probably seen this. So they get up and they say, hi, this is us. What we want to talk to you about today is this. And everybody in the room did the exact same thing. You know what it was?
Mm-hmm.
They take that printout and they flip to the last page.
Yes.
Because they knew that's where the ask and the conclusion was. So guess what?
Yep.
Presenters, you've lost your audience. The most important thing they want to know is going to come at the end of what you're about to talk about. They're literally ignoring you for 30 minutes and waiting until you get to the slide that they've already made a decision about.
Right. And
that's
so
here's
the trick, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And it's backwards. Now, again, this is why next week I want to talk about distribution and how this works and the right way to shape and cater the message and all that stuff, right?
Right.
Never do I ever in these asks, unless I already know who the person is directly, like they're within 1 degree of separation, never do I ever completely lay out that ask exactly the way that Michael is saying it. Okay.
Right.
And here's why, right? Like if you have zero relationship with somebody, they're going to say no.
Right.
They're just going to say no. What I'm trying to help everybody understand is that the best way to do this is to basically put it into sales or marketing language of storytelling to start with, hey, shaping the picture for them, then helping them understand your layer of influence, which helps to bolster this to them, and then laying this out. And it's never all in the same, I don't want to say never. It's more often than not in the same exact piece or marketing piece or ask piece or whatever you want to call it. I'm drawing a blank on the language because you have to layer it out. It has to be layered.
Yep.
Because the first time you ping somebody, better not even have anything to do with what you want them to do. It can't be.
Right.
Unless your layer of influence is quality enough that they know of you. Okay?
That's different.
Again,
that's different.
That's why I didn't want to throw out the good and the better just for the best. But I want you to understand, this is why you get people like Cardone saying, it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. Because what he's saying is that the more people who know you, the shorter the sales cycle or the shorter the ask cycle. It doesn't matter what it is, because you've already built up the rapport and the credibility just because they know of you. If people don't know of you, they're going to be way more skeptical, period. So this is a complex thing.
Yeah.
These things are important pieces. They're important to know, but this is also like the critical pieces, that the main pieces of this framework. And there's a whole bunch of other things that round it out, that when you get better at this and really good at it, that you begin to add tweaks, and specifically dealing with how you layer it and distribute it next. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. So
I want to give one little shorthand idea that might be a good nugget takeaway for folks to show Brad, to kind of say, this is what it might look like. It's in the layers. It's in how you frame it out. And I've actually coached managers to use this language when they're making requests of their employees, or even peer-to-peer, because it changes the conversation. It's how you start with why. Because I know health, wealth, relationship, insert appropriate item here, is important to you, now comes the ask. Or in order to important business priority, or insert their why here, we are asking, or what have you. But your lead, this is how you do the start with why and put it in their frame.
Hey, that's called great internal messaging, friends. So that's why this is important to you, even if you're not trying to get a guest, even if you're just trying to get somebody inside of your own organization to buy into what you're doing, period.
This is how you lead by influence.
Yeah. All right.
Because you cannot control other people, but you can influence them based on what already motivates them.
Yes. Yes, you can. All right. Hey, Michael, it's already,
we're there.
It's already
we're there.
2:00. So we're there. So next week, we're going to dive into distribution. We'll talk about how this all works, tying it together, like adding some more tactical things in there. But hopefully this was helpful. If it was, do me a favor, share this episode with your friends, whether you're listening to it on a podcast, take a screen cap, tag us in it, share it with us, give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever you want. If you're watching us in YouTube, if you're watching us on Facebook, if you're watching us on LinkedIn, whatever it is, give us a comment, send us a ranking. Michael's shaking his head. That's funny. And we want to hear from you. We have heard from some of you. So those of you who have, you have been heard. We will give you the list at some point. Teasing it out there now, since Michael made it very clear to me. But
people want to know.
But until then, until next week, 1:30, when we see you back here, remember, just because it's a sketchy idea doesn't mean it's not worth exploring. We'll see you next week. Take care.